Hello and welcome back to another edition of ESPN Scrum Reset. Sam, Bruce and Christy Doran back in the Schmidt house after a little hiatus, Christy, and I must apologise off the top for failing to schedule in a podcast last week. I wasn't sure that we needed it after the big Super Rugby preview, but I was certainly wrong in the eyes of the punters, the listeners out there. From me to them, a big sorry, a big apology. We're back in now to right the wrongs and rip into a big round one of Super Rugby.
Yeah, some people are still waiting to get to the start line in Super Rugby, the Queensland Reds being one of them. Fortunately, they have a bye to prepare themselves for a big round 3. But yet, was it the Mayor of Orange that was particularly disappointed? I know Pistol Pete up in Queensland as well. Shout out to you, gentlemen, for listening. But yeah, there was a few disgruntled people out there.
Yeah, the Mayor of Orange likes it from his drive between Orange and Bathurst. So rest assured, there's one coming this week, mate. It'll be in your ears by Tuesday afternoon for that trip if you're making it today. And Christy, we're going to start this year with a headline of the week. What's doing the rounds? What caught your eye? And of course, Super Rugby round 1. I guess what was your big one from round 1 from the weekend?
Charlie Cale. Geez, he's good. I had a couple of text messages on Sunday, a couple of former Wallabies included, who said, geez, this guy's good. He's going to be world class and should be part of every Wallaby match day 23 going forward. That's my first one. Circle back, I'll have another one after, but what's yours?
I've got to take on Charlie Cale. We'll come into that maybe when we dig into the Brumbies and Force as well. Mine was, Max Jorgensen. I mean, look, we spoke about it on several occasions last year after his tries in Brisbane and then that worldie against the Springboks in Johannesburg, didn't we? Did it again against France in Paris to round out the year. And it's getting to the stage now where the moment he gets the ball in a bit of space, something's about to happen. Like he's hit that level of kind of, oh my God, what's going to happen now? And I asked that of Dan McKellar and he said, what do you feel when you see that? Are you still thinking, okay, it's a 2-on-1 or this? He goes, no, I'm just a fan then because something's about to happen. And that move he put on Jock Campbell was eerily similar to that try he scored in Johannesburg. And look, we want to see more of that, don't we? And I think his 5-year deal is a steal, particularly if Rugby Australia gets it off the books for a couple of years with a couple of sabbaticals.
What I actually loved more than the move itself, like that move got people up, didn't it, on Friday night? It kind of lit up Super Rugby. It was what it needed. Yeah. I loved the 50-22.
It's classic.
If we're thinking about from a Wallabies perspective, an international who's been paid good money to do big things, that's just as important because that was the hammer blow in terms of, a bit of space there and he sensed the moment, he executed. And from a kicking perspective for a back 3 player, that's just huge these days going forward.
And gave them the territory then to score that all-important bonus point.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I'm talking about. So, yeah, really impressive play. I think the Tars' back 3 had a few issues on Friday night. It certainly wasn't perfect, but he is a guy that people start to get excited about. And the more of those headline moments, Rugby Australia will be very, very happy to have put him away for 4 or 5 years. We haven't actually really even discussed Jorgo's deal, but he has to be going to the Olympics. I know there's the option of a sabbatical or 2, and that gives a little bit of flexibility, which is nice because it's harder than it first meets the eye about getting those sabbaticals. For instance, Tate McDermott wasn't able to exercise his. He couldn't get away because so many Japanese clubs now don't just want someone.
There's not the demand there anymore.
Well, they don't want him going up for the 1 year. Richie Moana started this whole idea of the legacy player, leaving a legacy there, and it's very hard to do that for 1 year. And if you go there for 2 out of 3 years, which is a bit what Artie Severe's done at Kobe, that's a little bit different. I'll put it this one as well to you in terms of a headline moment. Phil Wall would have been ecstatic to see the Waratahs get the Bob Templeton Cup back. And there was a few people that messaged me on the Saturday and Sunday going, geez, they're already drinking out of cups, are they? But Phil would have also walked away going, oh, geez, who's the opposition there? Les Kiss's Queensland. And I feel like, he was coached by Kissy back in the day in those 2000s when Kiss came back from South Africa. But it is going to be, and I know that Hugh brought that up in the Twitter sphere. Yep. Is it too early to find a new Wallaby coach? It's a bit harsh, and you don't want to read too much into 1 week, but the pressure is going to be firmly on. And each passing week, it's going to, those cries are going to get louder and louder if indeed Queensland don't turn it around quickly.
Yeah, I wrote last week that narrative will just be unavoidable, not only for KISS, but for Rugby Australia, particularly, if the Brumbies do what they did in week one and kind of not surprise people, but just a timely reminder that this is what we do. We get, not written off, but we're probably underrated again and come out and put 50 odd on the force. So that's, Stephen Larkham was the other, one of the other key candidates for that vacant Wallabies job as well. Been to the semi-finals. On 3 occasions? Certainly two. Went within, very close 1 year going further. So, look, it's not going to go away.
2 things on that. Stephen Larkham, there's a bit of an idea that he withdrew.
Okay.
Look, he withdrew because he wasn't going to get it. So no one withdraws unless you genuinely think that you're not going to bake it. So you've got to clear that one up. The second point is that how often do succession plans really work? You look around the sporting landscape, wherever it is, a succession plan from like 18 months out, it's you need a lot to go right because people know what's happening, right? So
about as successful as they are in farming, mate, probably.
You know more about that, probably the Mayor of Orange does as well. Anyway, we'll talk more about Queensland and New South Wales in a moment because it's not just the Queensland New South Wales show, is it? It's not.
But one more, Christy, you had another headline you wanted to raise, and it was a point brought to us as well by a great friend of the show, Matty Ward. Late one from me, fellas. Apologies. Would you attempt to explain RA's decision agreement with Channel 9 to no longer show any free-to-air Super Rugby games? What is their thinking? Now, this was one of many questions that we're going to get to, and thanks for all your responses to our call out yesterday. We're going to do it every week because it was such a reaction for round one. But Christy, you also picked up on this. Feels like they missed a trick.
Yeah, I tweeted on Saturday morning because I knew that they weren't going to be broadcasting on Saturday evening. Why? Well, why are they not, when the NRL and the AFL seasons are weeks away, they not having this opportunity to go, draw attention to rugby union? It's the broadcast holders. Like, I know that the Winter Olympics is on at the moment and there's a lot of resources that have been put there, but this is seriously dropping the ball. And why? And did we know that this was going to occur? I think we did, because if you think about 10 months ago when Rugby Australia put out there, and they'd
next 5-year deal,
signed this massive deal. It was more than $200 million. It's a great uplift. Well, the devil was in the detail, and Ian Payton drew attention to it from the outset when he might have done journalism, but also being a non-entertainment employer, he quite rightly said, well, where's the free-to-air component? And his superiors were furious when he drew attention to the fact that there's no obligation on a Saturday evening to show rugby union, and Rugby Australia and Nine were saying, they were scrambling and going, well, it gives us more flexibility. Now we can do it on a Friday if we want to, or we can pick and choose. Well, hang on, first round and they're not there. It's hugely disappointing. If we go back to why they left Fox Sports, Fox, it did need a circuit breaker, refresh. There was too much negativity off the back of dire results for years. Raylene Castle and Checkers blow up in Tokyo to a whole raft of other things, but they left because of the desire to go to free to air, to go to all areas of Australia. And 4 or 5 years later, they've gone, thanks very much. We might take 1 or 2 extra million. We might get the squeeze. We know that Nine are seriously concerned about losing the NRL rights and they don't want to. So, clearly Nine and the NRL, maybe Peter V'landys has got another one over rugby union here by just going, hang on, we know that your broadcast rights deal is up in a year's time. Make sure that you do everything that you can to ensure that NRL is number one. Because how much rugby union did you see from an advertising perspective in the build up to round one Super Rugby? Basically
very
none.
Very little. And when they were that old deal, they would pump it during the Australian Open, wouldn't they? They're Nine. There was none of that I saw this year. There might have been one cameo down there, I think. But yeah, it was. I'm sure a lot of people would have been surprised by that, and it feels a little bit sort of master-servant in that relationship, doesn't it? That 9, hold all the power. They will absolutely dictate. Yeah, Phil Wall might be able to pick up the phone and say, guys, any chance? Oh, yeah, we'll think about that, Phil. But in all honesty, 9 hold all the cards here, don't they, in terms of whether they do or don't put any on free-to-air.
Yeah, and their coverage is great. I have nothing.
Absolutely.
I like
We've said it time and time and again on this podcast.
Yeah, but there's not enough attention. Like, unfortunately, there's 5,200 that turn out in Perth to watch the Force Brumbies. That's not good enough. My understanding is that the Force are losing about $10 million a year. Like, that number's not been out there, and I don't think Rugby Australia will like that number being out there, by the way. But Super Rugby needs people to show up. And if they're not, there's going to be people going, what's the future for this competition? Not just particular clubs, the competition. 16,500 turnout in Sydney, bit below par. But once again, like, where's the advertising on this to tell people to turn up on a Friday straight after work to go watch Super Rugby? Perfect time of year, middle of Feb. It wasn't a hot, sweltering evening.
It was nice,
was it?
Yeah. No.
And then if you look across the ditch, Chiefs Blues, about 20, maybe a tick under, and it's a big game. New Zealand derby, it was perfect conditions. Unfortunately, no Bowden Barrett, no Damien McKenzie. But what's the competition? It's probably not doing enough to try to get people through the turnstiles. Like, if this is rugby league, they're getting 40,000 for the first night. If it's a we just had Queensland, New South Wales. If it's Rabbitohs, Roosters, there's 40,000 there at Allianz, isn't there, for an opening night?
Pretty close too, you would think. Look, we don't want to put, start off with negative Nellies, even though potentially we might have with that one. So let's talk about a little more about that Waratahs Reds game. And, the Waratahs opened about 2.30 with the bookies. So certainly I saw them. They got crunched into sort of 2.10. Might have been even money, $2 by the time the opening whistle. It felt overs given what they'd done in the preseason. The Reds with a long injury list, neither Tom Liner nor Carter Gordon available. No Harry Wilson, a couple of others there as well. And look, the Reds it wasn't hard for them to identify where their Achilles heel was. 17 penalties. As a result, the first half never really got any flow to it. And that's why Jorgo's moment, I think, almost really kind of got the heart racing, didn't it? Because it had been so stop-start up until that point. But the Tars still had to grind them down, didn't they? Yeah, the Reds hung in it, even being down to 10 men when the number 8 there went to the bin. But eventually you felt that territory would eventually tell in the last 15 minutes. 3 tries. Again, Jorgo's kick, a 50-20 helps ice that. You always felt that despite only being ahead by 5 there at 17-12, that they were not completely in control, but they had the momentum. Dan McKellar after that walks away pretty happy.
Oh, he's so happy. and so he should. It was a good performance from New South Wales. And, the 17 penalties did kill them, absolutely. I think it was 11 at the halftime. Yep. And the fact is, it was 17-12 for so long, wasn't it? Like, halfway through the second half, there was no points that had been scored at that point in time. I'd bemoaned maybe 1 or 2 teams not taking 3 points.
I thought the same thing, yeah.
Particularly in New South Wales, I thought it was going to come back to bite them. In the end, obviously, it didn't. A reasonable decision from New South Wales to kick for the corner, and they scored off the back of that with Kylea.
If they don't get that one, then you're asking massive questions about that decision.
Yeah, and I actually, if you look at it, they were very lucky not to be penalised because Suwali had run past beyond the ball carrier, got in front, knocked out one of the Reds players, and then 1 phase later, New South Wales score. They were lucky not to be penalised there. So it could have really bit them in the backside. But quality performance, what I liked about it was a bit of physicality from some of those Tars players and guys that had been in the headlines, maybe not for the right reasons and in the amateur zeros. But the Clem Holloholo's debut night for him showed a bit of presence, and he'd come through the Super Rugby odds competition, which really is showing how valuable it was.
And they'd farewelled him last year at the end of last season. And this is a guy, I'll go back to when that World Cup bid process was taking part, and Rugby Australia were trying to show, where this is us, this is what we can do for the World Cup. We're right behind this. And they brought in some juniors that day, and Clem Holloholo was one of them. And a senior Waratahs official said to me that day that this is the bloke we want to keep. So I've always kind of had half an eye on him throughout that period. And then when he was delisted effectively after Super Rugby last year, I thought, that's, kind of a bit of a sad story. And then he turns up, he's training, has a great Super Rugby AU. And I think he was quoted sort of last week saying that, it was a kind of the kick up the backside I needed. I had to go away. I worked as hard as I possibly could. Got him back into that squad for Super Rugby AU, and then he starts round one. And yeah, sure, there was some rawness to his game still, and a few errors in there. He threw that offload that allowed the turnover for the Reds to score that first try through Tim Ryan over there in the corner. But you love his physicality, and he, together with Miles Amonasero, look, they're a couple of big physical bodies that the Waratahs probably haven't had too many of, probably since the Michael Checker days and Jack Botkita.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was a wild passage of play, wasn't it? With that led to that offload, and then the clever kick from Bryle, and Ryan manages to
He's a smart player, Joe Bryle.
Yeah, he is. You're going to just hear more and more of him, I think, in the next couple of years. But Ryan shows his speed, and Gamble, who I think, Dan McKellar made a good point. When Charlie Gamble plays well, the Waratahs play well, and they're at the niggly physical best. And it was good to see him have a spectacular moment there in the second half, where Jorgo gets his second try, doesn't he? But it was a smart performance from New South Wales. Jack Debrasini came on, finished the job. Hendren debuting. That was a big selection call from Dan McKellar, and I'd kind of I got some of the team mail on the Tuesday, and the fact that Kellaway wasn't there, and I'd kind of indicated that about a month ago on the pod by going, There's a few murmurs that maybe he's on somewhat of borrowed time. And it was nice to see him have a go as well, wasn't it? Because he was brilliant in that Super Rugby Oz comp, and really starred against Queensland when they took it the Santos Cup match out. Is it to Narrabri? I think it was. So he was another one who had a really good evening that night. So it was nice to see these guys get rewarded, and that's the value of the tournament there, and hopefully it is extended later this year. Dan Both are playing 80 minutes. Great work from him. Like the tight head prop.
Ethan Dobbins too. 3 turnovers, I think it was, and one key one in the lead up to maybe their fourth try, I think. He, probably an unheralded guy came through last year. The scrum was under a bit of pump last year. And I think, he's got claims to that starting role for as long as he wants it.
Yeah, and what I like about a lot of the play decisions from coaches across the weekend, particularly the Australian ones, they actually rewarded the incumbents. You look at Declan Meredith at the Brumbies, Tane Edmonds not just been rushed in. It's going, guys, you've been here, you've done the hard yards. We'll give you first crack here. And more often than not, they pay it off. And so that's a hard tip to all the coaches. I think they did a great job there. New South Wales, they exposed the fact that Harry McLaughlin-Phillips was at 10. And, it's his third year now. He's not like he's a rookie that's just come off the street to play. He's been there for a little while. And the fact is, Louis Wershon charged down twice in that first half, wasn't he? That's probably not good enough from your starting 9, who I think he's a really good young player, already going to be returning to Benetton after this season, and hopefully comes back one day to Queensland. But he needs to step up there a little bit more, build his way into the game. But I thought if there was a selection piece of the puzzle that maybe McKellar got over Kiss, was the 8, 9, 10. The fact that Queensland had less than 15 caps of experience or so between McLaughlin-Phillips, Wershon, the debutant 8, Latu, is it?
Yep.
Then that's just so raw. 8, 9, 10. We know how crucial that is with your selection. And you compare that to the Tars, where they've got Pete Samu, welcome back to Pistol Pete, into Jake Gordon, into Lawson Crichton, who gets first crack. I thought that was a real pivotal kind of selection battle when New South Wales won.
Yep, wouldn't disagree with that one. Question here from Brett Young on this game. Joseph Suoli'i. Is Joseph S. lacking line breaks in last 6 or so games because he's been closely marked, or does he need to straighten up instead of crabbing across field, or is he not playing in his best position? Well, I think that debate continues weekly and everyone's got a take on it. For me, I think the trouble with him playing in the centre is that he's not he doesn't have a lot of acceleration. So he's having to use his size and power off a couple of steps. And quite often, more often than not, he's winning that contact, but he's probably not busting the line, getting that offload away, like we might expect in the centres. And that's where, maybe that little bit of extra space out wider, he gets up ahead of steam. He becomes that much more difficult to tackle. That would be my take on that one.
Yeah, that they used him, I thought, quite cleverly in the first half. A couple of times in the blind side from scrums where they targeted the little guys at 9 and 10.
There was one occasion where I thought maybe he passed the tad early. I thought he got outside his man then.
Yeah, and I'd agree with you there. I think it was who was it? It was either, I think Hendren failed to give a ball as well to Jorgo in that first half, which would have been a certain 5 points there. I don't think McKellar doesn't want to play him at outside centre. I think he's almost been forced into that because at the moment with no Henry O'Donnell, who's taken some time out of the game, they don't have...
They're not deep in the midfield.
Yeah, they don't have that physical presence in the midfield. And so that's why they've been reluctantly forced into that move there. I completely agree. I think he's fullback wing. I think Les Kiss will kind of use him in that capacity. We've already seen Les say that Angus Crichton, that he's viewing him as a 12. That to me, all the indicators are that Suwali, from a test perspective, is going to be playing in the back three. Obviously, he's got the option to play at 13 going forward as well, and that's the utility value that you get there.
One from the Mayor of Orange as well around is Dan McKellar more in line with the way the international game is being played, more line speed. I think that was clear, certainly the other night, looking to cut attack off the second and third pass, kicking to a contest. I don't know if they kicked, overly equivalent to test level or that well. Scrappy game at times, but was it the difference? I think the line speed was the thing that stood out for me watching on, and you don't always see that so well on television. When you get that broader picture for sitting up in the media box, it does become that much clearer. And I think that combined with the physicality, if the Tars can bring that every week, then they will have a much better season than the 8th place finish of last year.
Yeah, there was one moment there in the second half where the Tars managed to put a couple of big hits on, and the Reds, it looks like something promising could happen, and then they passed in field and it was bang, bang. It was that double hit from the big guys. And Queensland ended up, I think it was Jock Campbell who picks up the ball and he kind of hacks it downfield, but it was symbiotic of that New South Wales line speed that you're speaking about. Yeah, I think Lockie McCaffrey and who's the defence coach there has a different...
Friend of the pod.
Should bring you back on the pod some point soon. I think it's very different to what the Wallabies defensive system was over the last year or two. And we'll find out a little bit more. Laurie Fisher was there in the stands on Friday. He actually popped up, I think, pretty early in that stand coverage as well, hiding in and amongst the fans.
Well, did he have the bucket hat on? I didn't say this.
Well, he did.
Well, then he's not hiding, is he? He would have to go to him being incognito would be Sam's bucket hat.
Possibly. Yeah. Anyway, shout out to Laurie too.
One more on this one from You Can't Stop the Rolling Maul podcast, I think. That's, to each their own. How much extra does Dan McKellar need to get out of the Tars to get over the handicap, in inverted commas, of being the biggest market in domestic rugby and the baggage of ever-growing list of recent failures of seasons? Well, the finals are non-negotiable, clearly, this year. And we said the other week that it feels like a forward pack, certainly, that is more in line with Dan McKellar kind of set up. And I want to give Matt Phillip a shout out. He's not the flashiest player out there, but what's he got? He's got a big engine. You look around at who's turning up in support when the Waratahs make a line break, who the forward is. It's Matt Phillip. Who's getting there for that first clean out? That's Matt Phillip. And we saw that there was a game that Wallabies beat the Springboks, I think that second one up there in Brisbane, when you might remember Tupou did that little bit of flick out the side to Corabetti down the wing. The bloke at that clean out before that ruck was Matt Phillip. Now, as I said, not the flashiest player around, hasn't got the speed of a Nick Frost or, the explosive power, raw power of a Will Skelton, but he works hard. He'll go all day. I think it's an inspired choice of captaincy, and I'm looking forward to him having a big season.
Needed a captaincy reset there, the Tars. Great decision. I think Matty Phillip has that command of actions rather than words. Like, we've known Matty Phillip for a long time, and we all thought it was a good move to bring him back. And once again, Dan McKellar is doing what you need to do to make an impression, not just in super late in the season, but what a test system has to be built about is a tight five. You might not have it yet with the front row, but you look at that second row now. They didn't even have Ben Grant there on the weekend, and last year he was one of their best, maybe their best tight five forward. Amasazero, Phillip, good combination that, and we saw one or two times that they brought down the maul. I think the DNA of the Tars is going to change, and it was interesting hearing both Phillip in the press conference and McKellar, where both of them actually had some nice little revelations. The Phillip was asked about test aspirations, because he was left out of last year's spring tour, and a lot of people thought he might come back into the mix, but he's had a great preseason to be able to get back to what he wants to be able to offer. He was at Cannon in Japan beforehand. Now he comes back and he's not been rushed into it. So he's got a statement, but he said, I've got to do it with New South Wales first. And he's the captain. So brilliant. The second one was that Dan McKellar was saying it was a bit intense, the environment last year. Yeah. And I think I brought it up on the pod about maybe the last pod, was that he acknowledged that there was a review. There's always reviews, but the review said it was just too intense, that people were they weren't enjoying coming to training. And he even acknowledged that, not just at the time, but even on the press conference on Friday night, which I thought it showed maturity. It showed that growth mindset that you want from a coach and a willingness to adapt. And you've seen on the social medias, they're doing the bit more ocean recovery. They're doing the occasional, like, you get rewarded off the back of a big long week. Come on the Friday and we'll reward you with like a sausage sizzle or whatever it might be to lighten things up a little bit. So yeah, it was good to see that. Look, absolutely top six, but we've always known McKellar's teams get better year two. They struggle year one. He struggled at Leicester, and I think there's a lot to like about this Tars team. I don't know, come the pointy end, are they going to be right there, because of the fact that their front row is still pretty young and growing and maturing all the time. But they've got some good things about them.
They do. That's a lot on the Tars. I think we covered off clearly what the Reds' Achilles heel was in terms of their 17 penalties that they gave away. Felt disjointed. They get the bye probably at a pretty good time for them. Yeah. Week two, when it came out, the draw, they probably think, that's not great. But then the injuries that they've had and, ongoing concerns around both Carter Gordon and Tom Liner.
I think Carter Gordon will be back round 3.
So that's a positive. Harry Wilson, probably a good chance to be back round 3 as well. He was confident the other week speaking at the World Cup schedule announcement. So, look, you're not going to write the Reds off after week 1. But as we said, look, it is an unavoidable narrative for Les Kiss and for Rugby Australia that if this team, they flatlined last year, same number of wins, I think 3 fewer competition points, 5th place again, out in the quarterfinals. You want to see them improving on that. And if they regress, then, it's not going to be a great look for Les Kiss at the start of August.
No, not at all. Look, in the same way that everyone's going, the Brumbies, geez, they were impressive. The Brumbies keep brumbing and they demolished the Force. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. That second half got away from the Force big time. But sometimes you don't want to read too much into the first week.
Absolutely.
If you think up to the Six Nations, Scotland just didn't show up against Italy, did they, in the first half? And then all of a sudden they bounced back against the world beaters being England to win another Calcutta Cup. So I'm not saying that the Reds are not going to make finals. I still think they will, but they've got to really... When I spoke to Fraser McRide at the Super Rugby launch over in Auckland a couple of weeks ago, he was speaking about accountability. And it's about, they know that what they've done in recent years, they might have had little improvements, but they need to take that giant step. They need to take that step now. So clearly it's the last one under Les Kiss before a new coach. There'll be a lot there to leave out. They'll be able to hopefully bounce back at home crowd, 20,000 fingers crossed at the Reds. They've done a lot of good things. They'll be all right. Yeah, Carter Gordon's a big one to come back. Tommy Liner's still just where Tom Liner's at. It's going to become a bit of a story as well. Like in terms of he's off contract at the end of the year. Where does Rugby Australia see him? He needs to start to show that he can get through a season.
Durability.
The durabilities have been plagued him ever since he touched down in Brisbane a few years ago. That's a big one. I think the other thing that was interesting was the midfield mix. We saw Josh Fluke limp off, but hopefully Danguna is not too far away. But the Dre Pacquiaos and the Isaac Henrys, it was interesting that they weren't there on the weekends. And so it was I thought that maybe a Flukey on the wing with one of those guys in the midfield to accompany Paisami might have been a better option, at the very least, off the bench. So some big selection calls for Queensland going forward, but it probably starts with, I thought Lucan had an okay game on the weekend, showed a little bit about him.
Yep.
needs to really push on, command himself, and demand those standards. That's what they're missing at the moment, a little bit of leadership as well.
Yeah, keep an eye on that team list for round 3 for the Reds. Could be a few changes incoming. To Perth, mate. Force and Brumbies. Now, look, you tipped the Force?
Yeah, I didn't. I thought right across. We'll get to the tipping comp in a moment, but I thought this was. We talk about the unpredictability. That was just right over every match there on the weekend, which is fantastic, isn't it? Yep. And you and I exchanged a message or two before that Force Brumbies game, and yeah, I tipped the Force, and early on I thought that's not a bad move when they were looking to play some good footy, but clearly they fell away, and yeah, it's an ominous opening 5 weeks for the Force, because you look at their season, they need to chalk up a couple of wins. They've got Moana Pasifika coming out, the Blues this weekend, the Highlanders away, the Hurricanes away. It's I wouldn't say completely intimidating, but that first week was a big one for the Force.
Yeah, and they open up a 10-0 lead, everything's going well, and then the Brumbies get back into that first half with a couple of quick tries. We'll come to Charlie Cale in a second. And the second half, all the Brumbies. Now, yeah, as you mentioned, we spoke about the crowd. It was also, bloody hot.
Yeah.
Express breaks in after 20 minutes. I think it was a longer half time as well, was it? So, player safety, absolutely paramount, top of the list. But you just felt, I agree with everything you said there, that the Force, they needed to get off the ground running in week 1. But when you look at the squad and you talk about how the Waratahs had that consistency between sort of 9, 10, 12. You got a new halfback there alongside Ben Donaldson. Haven't you got George Bridge into the midfield at 13? It feels, again, as we so often is the case with the Force, that they've all been thrown together. I think you described it as a nightmare for Benny Darwin's gain line analytics the other weekend.
It's a Barbarians team, isn't it?
And how do you then build with that side? Now, if they can stick with that team and build into the season and get that cohesion, then maybe that'll be a good thing. But the other question, and it came from the punters out here, a number of you talking around the pressure on Simon Cron, that, he got that contract extension, what was probably a couple of years ago now, that really, this team, apart from the odd win here and there over against, more fancied opposition, they just haven't improved, have they? Really under him. He came in, it was seen as a great loss when the Waratahs lost Cronny up to Japan. The Force got him back. And, Twiggy talking around how he's the best coach, a coach for them to build their franchise around. But it just hasn't happened. It is only week 1, of course. Blues this week, chastened by their defeat at home to the Chiefs in a narrow one. Doesn't get any easier. Look, how much focus, I guess, should we be putting on Simon Cron? And necessarily, is it the coaching or is it the recruitment?
Well, they're hand in hand, aren't they? So the interesting thing is Simon Cron's not being as active as he usually is, as aggressive as he usually is in the transfer kind of market. Is that an indicator that he's looking maybe not to go on? I think possibly. To me, I've already heard whispers that he might go to Toyota.
Okay.
Go back to Toyota in Japan at the end of the year. Obviously, Toyota's having a hellish run under Ian Foster and Steve Hansen. Is there some movement away from there to bring back Cron, who was very well regarded? I think they're possibly looking to bring him up there. It's fascinating up in Japan at the moment. So at Kobe, Dave Rennie was almost pushed out. And even though he's been looked at as the All Blacks coach, it's just extraordinary. He could be the next All Blacks coach, and he's been moved on from Kobe, is my understanding. Who are they bringing in? Wayne Smith. The master of coaches as their DOR. He's not going to be the full-time coach there. I think they've got a former Crusaders halfback who might be going in there at the moment, or shortly anyway. But that Japanese market's fascinating from a coach's perspective. And yeah, Cronny might go back there. But I think it'd be a bit of a loss if he does, because there's elements of his coaching and what he stands for I really, really like, but there hasn't been the progression. And it's not surprising with all that, with the movement between players. They absolutely have one of their strongest squads in some time, but they don't just click overnight. And that's the thing. Like Franco Molina was a really impressive, almost a bit of a lone wolf in terms of what he achieved on Saturday evening. He was brilliant. He was the first to several kicks there. Remember the Harry Johnson Holmes, it was Molina that was there to put on some pressure as well.
Yep.
And when they were, and then later on, of course, that brilliant try that's set up in part by Dono, but not enough. I think that they chased that game in the second half big time. They needed to land the blow on the stroke of half time where they didn't. BPA had a pretty good first half, I thought, but they couldn't land that blow. Tizano was a bit selfish, being held up over the line a couple of times. Yeah, 10-0 was a good start, but it did feel like they needed to be up the 17 kind of nil to really press home that advantage and to put some pressure on the Brumbies. But because we know how well drilled they are, aren't they? And they showed all that character in the second half of how well drilled they are. The DNA of the Brumbies just shone through, didn't it? People were saying, it's a bit of a no-name backline for the Brumbies. Pritchard has been hanging around in the wings for a little while, and Tom Wright has been saying he's the guy to watch this year. Declan Meredith's been part of that Brumbies system.
Called it the other week. I thought he was going to start ahead of Tane Edmund. Yep.
Yeah, and brilliant. He's a great place kicker as well. What he does for kicking for touch is superb, but he knows the system so well, doesn't he? The Muirheads, they're all there. That Brumbies back row is outstanding as well. Maybe Caden Neville bringing back the years, rolling them back rather with him and Lockie Shaw, but the yin and yang, the older master with the young guy coming through. It's a really good performance from the Brumbies. But yeah, the Force just Kirtley had a shocker in that second half. Unfortunately, when you're chasing the game, it looks like they were really starting to throw it about, and they got looser and looser, and the Brumbies capitalised.
Charlie Cahill, we mentioned him earlier. Missed just about, I think Stephen Larkham said in the press conference he might have played 3 or 4 games last year. Certainly weren't in Super Rugby from memory. Stress fractures in the back, something we usually associate with fast bowlers. Not so much.
He's pretty fast, isn't he?
Well, and this is the thing, Christy. I wrote yesterday for ESPN that hybrid players are all the rage in international rugby right now. We've seen it with the Springboks and their 6-2 and 7-1 splits. England had even talked about it. Potentially using, is with the aerial contest and the escort runners and everything there that, we've hit a situation where we're having second rowers out on the wings. And, Josh Kemeny was a hybrid player under Eddie Jones at Rugby World Cup 2023. But Charlie Cahill, got the speed certainly to cover a position out wide. He's an athlete. People probably want to see a little bit more bulk on him, but look, it was a hell of a return from a guy who has missed a lot of footy. And I just think that if Australia want to go down that hybrid path, he could be the closest man to do it.
He is. Yeah, he reminds me of what he can do as like a Henry Pollock at the moment. And they're slightly different frames, but they've got that explosive pace about them. But Cahill in the line-out is brilliant. There is no one better from a defensive line-out in Australian rugby at the moment. And him at the front is just brilliant. He's so quick off the ground that he can get up there, and he's tall enough. And it's a fascinating one, this whole idea of, you've got to put more weight on. I think to an extent, but what he lacks there perhaps a little bit is the footwork that he's got. He's just brilliant in that capacity. So he if you look at that Wallabies side, you go, well, in the 23 off the bench for the final 30 minutes is just a really sexy proposition.
Sexy one.
He's not just a player. He is articulate. He's a handsome guy. We need people to sell the game. How well spoken was he in his post-match press conference? His post-match interview with Stan. And this is great signs, because you need people selling the game, and he can do it. He's a guy that, Jorgo's not particularly loud, and sometimes it's hard to get a headline out of. I'm not saying that Charlie Cahill's a headline, walking headline, but what he is someone who's very well articulates himself very well. And I think he's a player that we're going to hear and see a lot more of going forward.
Yeah, people might have forgotten he played those couple of games against Wales, Joe Schmidt's first 2 in charge back in 2024, and then injury hit after that. And as I said, we barely saw him at all in Super Rugby last season. So, number one, he's got to stay on the paddock and stay injury-free. But you're right, there is something about him, and he just would give you that little bit of versatility in a 6-2 split, I think, in particular, on the bench.
Yeah, he made something like about 22 tackles or so.
Yep.
He's not a one-trick pony there, is he, by any stretch of the imagination? So, yeah, good signs for him. I thought Rob Valentini hit the ground running really nicely. I don't know, there was a fair bit of physicality and sting. He was slow out of the gates last year. And when you're missing these guys, the Tom Wrights, the Lenny Katows, the Noah Lolisios, the Tom Hoopers. You need someone to step up. He did. James Slipper keeps James slipping. The bloke,
Love that, yeah.
the bloke is, he. It's not just a final Johnny Farnham year here going around for extra cash. He's a guy that means business, and to have someone like him, his experience, it's a really, really good sign for the Brumbies that they've started well. But we've got to remember it's round one, and I think the Brumbies may have looked a little bit better because of how poor the Force were, certainly in that last half an hour.
Yeah, Rob Valentini spoke to our own Brittany Mitchell for ESPN and said basically that he just didn't really feel like he ever quite got going in 2025. Was delayed start to Super Rugby, the calf issues through the Lions series, and I think through the rest of the Test season, didn't look like the Rob Valentini, the two-time John Eales medalist that we knew from 2024 and 2023 when he was, world class. So I'm expecting a big season from Bobby V.
Yeah, and calf injury is going to do that, right? And the fact that he started so positively is a really good plus. Luke Reimer coming off the bench there. I like what they did there, the Brumbies. They had a couple of guys that they brought off to inject some pace and tempo into the game. Pritchard, he was good, wasn't he? He lost the ball a couple of times after making breaks, so that's clearly something that he'll fix up. But he and his brother, we're going to start to hear so much more of going forward. You look at the results of the under-20s on the weekend and the Queensland, New South Wales, a lot of people were excited about that. It delivered. Yep. There's a couple of guys coming through. That's a reason in itself to have Stan, is to watch this under-20s generation come through, because there's a few big players there, and Trayvon Pritchard from the Reds is certainly one of them.
Yeah, I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago too, so keep an eye out for that on ESPN. Right, Chrissy, let's whip around through the other games, and we started the season in Dunedin. Under the roof. Highlanders getting the job done over the Crusaders with a late penalty goal. Angus Gardner, I think, gets that decision right. Cody Taylor, interesting yarn from Richard Nola in the stuff.nz. Co.nz press today around that was eerily similar to, not eerily similar, but England lose defeating the All Blacks at Twickenham last year. Cody Taylor infringement starting the rot for the All Blacks there, and going on to probably claim Scott Robertson as All Blacks coach. If we move that on to, was that Jamie Joseph? Yeah. Was that celebration? I think the word is that Dane Coles and is it the interim CEO Lancaster are in Japan now, speaking with Dave Rennie potentially. Had been cited last week in Dunedin. Dane Coles is an interesting one, making that call, isn't it? But anyway, that is a 2-horse race, effectively, as we have spoken about. But Jamie Joseph, look, it had to be just another little tick in the box for him. And is he your tip to get the job?
I reckon Liam Napier might have his finger closer to the pulse than me on this one. The fact is that Renz is, New Zealand rugby do like him. The previous administration liked him, even though he wasn't with the ABs at the time. I just think there's a little bit about him with, Artie being up there, Brodie Retallick, potentially he comes back. Eddie Jones made a good point the other day. Brodie Retallick is just lighting up Japanese rugby at 35. And the fact is,
I saw that he'd kind of paid to that though. Brody said, no, there won't be a test return.
Well, depending on who's in charge and the circumstances, right? Like, I don't think some players don't want to be out there advocating for themselves. Is he one of them? Where did the AB struggle a little bit last year? It was around the line out, wasn't it? So, I think it won't have hurt. It wouldn't have hurt Jamie Joseph's reputation to be able to beat the Crusaders. There are few players that they've lost recently with Fabian Holland, big loss, and then obviously Dylan Pledger, really exciting young 9 earlier in the preseason. To lose those guys and then come out and deliver was great. I think once or twice we saw over the weekend, particularly with the Crusaders, if you're not going to respect your opposition by having a Will Jordan on the bench, that can come back to hurt you, can't it? And he is just an amazing player. He almost got the Crusaders across the line, just him being there. But great win first up for them.
Yeah, and I think the Brumbies actually go across to Christchurch on Sunday this week, don't they, for round 2. So it'll be a fascinating contest, an early indication of just where the Aussies are against Kiwi opposition. Full marks to the Highlanders. Did you tip them?
No, I did. Or I tipped them to make the top 6, though.
Okay.
And if you listen to the previous pod, you might have heard me really talk about their stocks going up this year. That was a swingy one.
Yep.
I really thought the Highlanders were a chance, but I thought maybe the fact I like the Crusaders bench, the fact that they could bring on Jordan, and they did, Fletcher Newell was on there as well.
Yep.
I thought that would be the difference. As it
I
turned out,
made the same decision, yeah. And just a shout out for our tipping comp on ESPN footytips.com.au. It's live there. We've got about 20 odd in the league. So I know probably a lot of people tip with Super Brew. Forget that. They're no good. Come across to footytips.com.au, your home of tipping in Australia, and join our league. And Christy, yes, a bit of curry coming in for you. Questions, that you don't really know your footy, but we'll let you have a right or reply in round 2. Do you reckon you can tip the perfect round?
Well, let me just say, last year I won the Raw tipping comp.
Okay.
And there was about 400 or 500 people, I think, that was involved in that one. So, look, what's the old saying about one hot summer, one hot day doesn't make a summer kind of thing. So
one swallow doesn't make a summer?
Yeah,
Is that one?
Something like that. Yeah, look, I think I got 2 from 5 in the end, so I've got a bit of work to do.
Yeah. Oh, well, it's not a long season. It's a sprint, not a marathon. So, yeah, you want to find your form in round 2. Let's go to Auckland, Blues and Chiefs. Chiefs in another. Look, it was a physical game. I sent a message to you about midway through saying not, a great Kiwi derby here that's happening right now. Again, stop-start. Physicality was certainly high. The interesting thing I want to touch on here, though, Christy, is I went to social media around the Tupou Vi try and was trying to work out where we'd seen it last year. It was, of course, Dan Sheehan during the Lions series, coincidentally, who had a try, not even a try, he got hammered when jumping and had a penalty blown against him in Ireland's narrow victory over Italy, which we'll touch on the Six Nations shortly. But I love this from Super Rugby yesterday because they came out and said, look, no, we've reviewed this decision and we are under the basically that is not a try. It shouldn't have been awarded. I love that decisiveness. Now it's a line in the sand, right? For referees saying that is not a try. If you jump, we know there's this confusion around, yes, you can dive to score a try effectively, but I guess you can't dive over defenders. You're diving into the corner and you've got cover coming across, then play on. But when you launch to jump over someone, we saw it with Miles Amadasero. I don't think he grounded the ball, mind you, on Friday night, and that one that Paul Williams disallowed just before that yellow card for the Reds player. But this from Super Rugby, I thought, yes, this is what punters want to see. They want to see clear, a bit like when Graham Annesley used to front up in the rugby league, I think on a Tuesday, and say, go through, usually it was around escort block runners in, try scored out wide. But something that we don't typically get from World Rugby. Like, have we actually had a summation of that Jack Morgan clean-out from last year? Do we ever hear anything publicly about that? I love that from Super Rugby. Monday, it hit our inbox in the afternoon. They got that wrong. This is not a try. We move on. We now know that is the case for the rest of the season.
Yeah, I tweeted about the same thing. Decisive action, that's what you want, isn't it? So, yeah, hat tip to them. And it's just so obvious because World Rugby clamps down. Like, you've got to go low. You can't go high because you run the risk of hitting him, clocking him on the head, and his players purposely trying to avoid that. So, yeah, brilliant, decisive action. It's so obvious to determine if a player's diving to score out wide as opposed to jumping over a defender. I'm sure there'll be 1 or 2 case studies throughout the year where that kind of remark from me gets brought into question with a slightly interesting touchdown. But I agree. Really good to see Den Ireland get penalised from Holly Davison was the coach, the referee there, and her first one in the Six Nations. It was brilliant to see.
Love that. Quick shout out to Moana. Look, if you tip Moana over the draw in Fiji after Ardie Savea's departure, well done to you, because I certainly did not see that coming. They charged out of the blocks, built an earlier, 21-0 lead, 21-7, and were really never headed. A bad loss for the Drua first up. They need to win these games at home if they're going to be quarterfinalists. But Moana and Miracle Failagi, look, we spoke about him last year, how much I think he benefited from having Ardie Savea alongside him. And now the skipper of that team, he's a great story. Again, he's articulate, he's considered when he speaks. And you know what? Moana, don't write him off this season at all.
No, and he's someone that you wanted in your fantasy side. I'm thrilled that I did get him in there along with Charlie Cale. But Whangangi, he's a great story because he's from the islands
Samoa,
himself, and he's come in, he's been selected out of there, and he keeps getting better. He's a quality player. The physique on the bloke, the shoulders are huge, aren't they? And he is a heck of a talent. It's going to get better and better. I think this is another one of coaches. Coaches can be so decisive, I think, out there because there's questions around Fiji's coach there,
Glenn
Jackson. There was questions last year, and some people were assistant coaches and some are head coaches. And we've seen Tana Umaga, I think, grow. He's got a good coaching team around him. He's a head coach now, I think, and it's the perfect role, that Moana role, isn't it, for him? He can get them up, knows what it's about. Jacko, massive questions on him as to whether or not he's a head coach. In the same way that there was questions around Darryl Gibson, is he a head coach? People loved him as an assistant and maybe didn't quite find his feet from a head coaching capacity and role. I think similar questions are being asked about Jacko there. But first week, but that's a big loss for them first up. And they've got the Tars on Friday night this week.
The draw, yep.
It's a big game. They've got to break that duck and that drought about not being able to win away from home if they're going to be finals contenders.
Indeed. Mate, that feels like a pretty good wrap on Super Rugby. Let's talk quickly on the Six Nations. Let's go with Italy and Ireland to start with because, Italy, when they beat the Wallabies last year, everyone's look, it's not a great look for Australia, clearly. But there's no doubt that this is an Italian team on the rise. You mentioned their win over Scotland last week, fully deserved. They are no longer just a set piece and a defensive team. They are hard at the ball at the breakdown. They've got quality backs. Menoncello, I think, is a world-class centre probably. There's no doubt about that. Louis Liner on the wing scored a great try against Scotland last week. He's a threat in the air. And look, they were bloody close to winning this one. Ireland are probably heading in the other direction. But is it fair to say we might serve the mystery of Harold Holt before we get to the bottom of forward passes? The discussion around what constitutes a forward pass. I felt for Holly Davidson kind of just overruled her here, and that shouldn't be the case. I felt as though she was looking at that going, you know what, I'm not convinced. And he said, no, it's clear and obvious. To me, that wasn't clear and obvious. We understand what physics does with the rugby ball when players are in motion. To me, I would have been happy if that was a try. Louis Liner in the corner. I think that would have been 17 or certainly 17-15 kick to come. And maybe Italy do something, get their first win over Ireland in Dublin.
Yeah, huge moment. Unfortunately, she's got it wrong, but I completely agree with you. I think what didn't help them was that 22-metre line there. And that line, it does look like, yes, the ball does go beyond it, but at the same time, it's physics, isn't it? It's running onto the ball and the person throwing the ball,
it was a hell of a pass too.
Well.
He'd line it on the chest,
completely agree. It was a tough one. It was a moment where you go, "That's a shame. What if?" But you know what? The captain post-game, wasn't that just a breath of fresh air around, we're not blowing up about this. We're going to congratulate Holly Davidson for what she did. And if you haven't seen the clip, you can find it pretty easily on social media around how well-spoken this person was around.
Michelle Lamara. Yep.
Yeah, regarding Davidson and what an achievement. What a moment for rugby to be able to celebrate, it's not tokenism. This is someone who's a quality ref who's getting better and officiated a game of 80,000 last year for a World Cup final. And there's probably moments in there you go, but there's moments in every game where you go, they probably got that one wrong. So, yeah, well played to her. Yeah, the Irish just scraping across the line. And that we've been saying it for years that they are slightly on that decline, but they need to work out quickly who their 10 is and going forward. But, yeah, they've clearly got a couple of people out. That scrum got monstered, didn't it? But you're right in the sense if we draw it back to Australia, Italy's a team now that they're almost joining the big boys at the table there around that. They're a team that you don't want to.
Well, they're now in that next block with Australia, with Scotland, with Fiji, and maybe less so Argentina. Argentina and Ireland might be about to flip-flop there potentially. But they are certainly, I think they're now, that win over Scotland moved them ahead of Scotland in the ninth maybe on the ladder. So I think they're absolutely in that next block.
Yeah, they are. I agree. I don't know if I'm completely writing Ireland off. I still think that they're going to be a very competitive team come that World Cup. They're going through that teething issue at the moment. You don't mind that 18 months out from a World Cup because it gives you time to be able to address some of the struggles that you've got at the moment.
Wales, poor old Wales, look, bad to worse. France, could have put 70 or 80 on them, feeling they lost a little bit there in that last 20 minutes or so. They had that game won early doors, as you would expect with the quality that they've got in their team. But if you haven't seen it, go and look at the comical clip, I think, just before halftime, wasn't it? They get a turnover. Wales, they've got to kick the ball out, and whether it was the second row or the back row, puts a little kick in, ricochet, France scoop it up, and the winger, not BLB or the other fella, who a double or a hat-trick in the end. Did he score? Certainly two. Look, they've got backline stars coming out their eyeballs. Damien Penaud's not even in the squad. France, they are setting themselves probably for a big final day at home to England, although they've got to go to Murrayfield as well, France, which is not going to be a snap.
Of a bogey team for them.
So keep an eye on that one. I like this start this year. 3 weeks on the bounce. Usually it's been 2 week off, 1 week off, 1-1, I think. So great that we've had 3 games to start with. Italy, France this weekend. Scotland go to Wales, and England do have Ireland, probably the game of the weekend at Twickenham. So fascinating to see that one wind out, because England, they were, hugely disappointing up at Scotland. I think that's now 7 of 8 Calcutta Cups for Scotland. And, Gregor Townsend pretty much hangs his hat, his coaching hat on that one after their devastating defeat to Italy last weekend. But this is the game this weekend. That was 12 wins up until that point for England. They were ordinary, clearly a 20-minute red card to Henry Arundel. Effectively 30 minutes because he had the 10 minutes in the bin, doesn't he? So it's a bit of a weird, that one. But they were never at the races. Scotland fully deserving of that win. And England still some question marks around whether they can bridge that gap to the big boys.
I think they can. They just didn't have a great evening. They dropped a lot of balls. They made half breaks, and then they were, unfortunately, they blew it. You think about Scotland, they were 17-0 up after as many minutes, and they were just outstanding early on. Like, that ball, that baton from Finn Russell to, it started from White, great ball to Russell, the baton to Hugh Jones, who scores. That's just first class. And we've said it time and time again about Finn Russell, but on another day, maybe that doesn't go to hand. Yep. And then all of a sudden, it's a different start. But they blew England out of the gates. They were supremely good. And England, just chasing their tails, couldn't quite land a couple of the killer blows which are required. But yeah, it's fascinating. Like, 1 week, Gregor Townsend can't coach. He's run his race. He's been there for, what is it? It feels like almost a decade.
He's been to 2017 now, yeah.
It's been a long, long time since he first took over. And it did look like, and it does look like they've plateaued to an extent, but they have the abilities to step up and play these big games. The inconsistency just kills them.
Yep.
Consistency, rather. And the lack of. But Kyle Steyn out in the wing was just superb. He played brilliantly. Like, Jamie Ritchie was great. Jack Dempsey, the two of them back rowers got injured, unfortunately, but they had big starts to the game there. It was a great game. The first half was so dramatic with what happened, and then they the attempted drop goal from George Ford, which he generally does so well, gets charged down, and they end up scoring. Jones scoring under the sticks there, and that's game, set, and match. And you could just see Gregor Townsend just sipping his tea or whatever he was having, and just a tiny little smirk to go, geez, I've got this one. But it buys him time. But David Nucifora is there. They've got a pretty good setup, a good person for Townsend to lean on. There'll be some serious questions around. He's been linked to Newcastle taking over there. This isn't just going to be a 12 months that he's allowed to coast through. He'll be, Nucifora will be interrogating right the way through about how do we get this side to not just be showing up at a World Cup, but to actually land a punch against a top-tier nation.
Here's one for you. We know that I think Scott Robinson's got a non-compete for 2026.
12 months, yeah.
Is he a coach that, Scotland say, look, Scott, just come in and just join our backroom staff for the run of the World Cup here. Get out of New Zealand, come up for the Six Nations, another voice for Gregor Townsend to lean on, probably a nice kind of soft landing point for him. Obviously, there would be inevitable questions, and we will hear about his side of the story at some point, I'm sure, although we're still probably waiting to hear from Dave Rennie about his Rugby Australia exit from a few years ago. But that feels like a nice little re-entry for Scott Robinson if he does wish to get back into the international game. I wonder if that, Scottish Rugby Union is reaching out at some point and going, hey, Scott, just come up the Murrayfield for a while.
Yeah, well, there'll be a person just down the road at Glasgow, Franco.
Who is the tip kind of to succeed?
Exactly, and he's been great at Glasgow. Glasgow are doing superb things there. I don't think Edinburgh had a player in that starting
one on the bench, I think it was.
Yeah, and they didn't have a starting 15 player there. Glasgow's dominated it, and obviously a couple of guys from overseas clubs as well. But it shows the beauty of Six Nations footy. Firstly, that win. It's an interesting question there around what does Razor do. I wouldn't rule it out, but I think at the same time, the guy can clearly coach. He just got it, and he would have learnt so much from that experience. Like what we've heard has been pretty damning, hasn't it? Around the the PowerPoint or the presentations that he's doing online. He's not really even addressing them face to face. The selection kind of stuff, not being completely honest, transparent. Yeah, it doesn't all look great, but you're right. There are two sides to stories all the time, and maybe he should have been given the opportunity to develop as an international coach. There's no the ABs, the pressure that it comes under is immense, clearly. So, yeah, but drawing it back to the Six Nations, how exciting! Most sides there with one win, one loss. France look like the ones that it's theirs to lose at this point in time, but
France going to France probably at some point too.
Yeah, they could. And Scotland, as I said before, have been a bit of a bogey side in recent years, and that last match between England and France is going to be brilliant themselves. What England got wrong as well was the selection. Like, they've gone in there with a specialist 9 and a specialist 10 on their bench. Clearly, they weren't expecting a guy to be red carded, but I don't understand how coaches can sometimes get that wrong. Like the fact is that they weren't able to cover where they needed to cover. Finn Smith is a 10. He's not a 12, and they came unstuck there. And that's the risk of not having, going a 6-2 split, but the risk of not being able to have a Damien Willemse with what South Africa might be able to do, where you can play 10, 12, 15. Like, it just is madness at times. What goes through the head to get to that point, I don't get it.
Yeah, great time of year regardless. Super Rugby underway and Six Nations, whether you get up and watch it or watch the replays or the minis on Stan on a Saturday, Sunday, or was even a Thursday night kickoff the other week, wasn't it too, which was interesting. Mate, anything else doing the rounds? I feel like that's a pretty good wrap for the week.
Yeah, big wrap, big round 2. And I think probably the opportunity for teams and coaches is to prove that week a lot can change, in a week, can't it? And we saw it that the storylines flip on its head up in the Six Nations. Can the Super Rugby sides do that? There'll be a couple of them. They'll be desperate to do it. It's a huge game for the Force and Blues in particular, what they do there, how they respond. They've got more or less the cattle, I think. George Bridge was barely sided, a bit like Suwali for the Tars. Is there an opportunity to see what they can do with the midfield to be a little bit more potent there and not so lateral?
A shout out to guys for YouTube. Obviously, a lot of people listen to us through audio on the way to work, on the way home, at the gym, whatever else. But if you get a chance, go and check out YouTube. The full clip will be up there this week. About 10,000 views for that one with Liam Napier around the All Blacks coach a few weeks ago. So please check us out there. Join the tipping comp as well. Just go into footytips.com.au and search for ESPN Scrum Reset. It should pop up there. Come in and you'll be able to, give Doran some curry. Big shout out to James Drury, the artisanal spreadsheet conductor down there in the Highlands for his topping the round 1 ladder. Doran, mate, that's a wrap. We'll see you next week.
Can't wait. Cheers.
Thanks all. I'll be back here again, same time, same place. Until then, enjoy the footy. Cheers.